One of the most common requests I get is to do a video on how to bind a thesis. My professional background is in research and I do have a PhD. Because of this background, I've spent hours in libraries reading dissertations. For me, a thesis binding is a very standard case binding in full buckram in a very conservative colour and titling with an overly long title, author and year. The binding I decided to demonstrate is loosely based on the commercially bound copy of my PhD thesis. The key features that I've used are cloth reinforced end papers, library corners, cord reinforced head caps, a French groove outer joint, and of course done in a full buckram covering. The important differences are that instead of machine oversewn single sheets, this project will use sewn sections, splitboard board attachment instead of being cased, and the French joint is supported, also known as a Harrison groove. I'll have time to talk about how commercial thesis binding is done and my design choices for this project later in the video. I've not shown taking the PDF file and formatting it for sections and folding the sections. I have a video on this if you need help. I start by quickly collating sections to make sure they're in the correct order. The end papers are simple flexible made end papers with a hidden cloth joint and a waste sheet tipped on and folded around. The waste sheet will become the insert for the split boards. I start by folding the coloured and white folios and tipping them together. While I was folding paper, I fold an extra folio of white and cut it along the fold to make the waste sheets. I use a wide strip of adhesive to tip the folios together, as later I'll tip the four edges of these folios together as well. This is instead of laminating the two folios together, which would make a true made end paper. Since I'm using a heavier coloured paper, I didn't want to produce a very stiff first free end paper, which is what a true made leaf would have been. When I graduated, we had to have 6 copies of our thesis bound, 3 for examiners, 1 for your supervisor, 1 for the library, and 1 for yourself. This requirement for every grad student finishing a degree to have a heap of books bound supported a big industry. Binderies specialised, and still do, in dissertations and periodical binding. However, many universities are no longer requiring hard copies of thesis be submitted, and libraries are dramatically reducing the number of hard copy journals they keep. This industry is in fast decline. For the cloth reinforcing, I cut 2 strips of starched calico 1.5 inches or 40 millimeters wide. Any thin cloth will be fine. This thin, stiff cotton is easier to use and plenty strong. I'll cut the strips to just longer than the sections, maybe an extra 10 millimeters. I'll glue out the strips of cloth and put about 3 millimeters onto the white paper, and the majority of the cloth will be folded around to the coloured side. I'll use a scrap piece of paper to help fold the wet cloth around. To complete the end papers, I tip the waste sheets over the strip of cloth on the white side and fold it around the end paper. It's fine that the waste sheet is not as wide as the text, as this gets inserted in the split board later. I overlap the cloth with the waste sheet by 1 millimeter to hide the cloth. I finish by trimming the excess cloth at the head and tail. Now I'll make the split boards. In a supported French joint, the lower board extends all the way into the shoulder, while the outer board is short of the shoulder by the width of the joint. I don't want to make the joint too shallow, so I use a strong card for the inner board and the usual binder's board for the outer. I use a 20 point or 0.6 millimeter thick card and 2.4 millimeter binder's board. The total thickness will be 3 millimeters plus the covering material. By the usual rules, you would normally apply the adhesive to the thinner inner board, but in this case the binder's board is much more absorbent, and I'm a bit worried about the bond if I only glue the hard inner board, and I don't want to glue both. I put a good layer of EVA roughly 2/3 of the way across the board and then put them together and put them under lightweight pressure in the press. The weight of a brick would be fine too. Once the boards have dried, I can use them to hold the text in the finishing press while I mark up the spine. I put trim marks 3 millimeters from each end and the kettle stitches 15 millimeters from each end. I'm going to sew on 4 12 millimeter wide linen tapes, so I divide between the kettle stitches by 5 and mark the tape positions. I use the tapes to find the sewing locations 1 millimeter or a bit less either side of the tapes. It's not essential to rule lines across the spine, but I like to, and then I put a diagonal line at the head. I'll make my usual hooked punching template from some scrap 10-point card. The main thing to remember when punching holes is with the end papers. The end papers are sewn to the text through the inner folio of white. You don't want to make holes in the outer coloured paper. When punching these holes, push the awl through close to vertical and ever so slightly in from the fold. For all the regular sections, push the awl through at 45 degrees directly through the fold. When doing the last end paper, you need to flip the punching template to avoid going through the coloured paper. The sewing is straightforward all along sewing. If you are binding a thesis for someone, I strongly recommend using a nice paper instead of standard 80 GSM copier paper. I used a nice, heavier 100 GSM paper. With 4 sheet sections and the heavier paper, I decided to use a slightly thicker thread and went with 18-3 linen. I did end up with a bit more swell than I wanted, and 25-3 would have been a better choice, but I managed. To make the video more interesting, I decided to show a different way of joining the first 2 sections. I've been aware of this approach for some time, but never used it. It was doing an online workshop with Kathy Abbott that has made me decide to use it going forward. Instead of joining the first 2 sections with a square knot, I just leave a good 6-inch tail of thread and go up into the 3rd section. Once I've sewn the rest of the text, I'll flip it over, put a needle on the tail that I left, and join the outer sections using the standard double kettle stitch. This avoids the bulky square knot. The main thing to remember, as always with sewing, is to not over tighten the kettle stitches. So what type of bindings do commercial binderies produce for theses? The text for most theses is printed by the author as single sheets. Before digital printing technology came along, it would be typed. Thus, most of these bindings are single sheets. They would be sewn using an over-sewing machine, the spine glued, a nominal round added, and sort of backed with a backing machine with a big steel roller. Then the spine is lined, a case made, the case is totaled on the spine, and finally the book is cased. The rounding and backing are done by brute force. The resulting binding superficially looks great, but in no time the text will sag in the case, probably damaging the inner hinge. But since almost no one will ever read it, the binding will last decades before it's finally thrown out. This means that in the home bindery, it is difficult to recreate a commercial thesis binding. But would you want to? A big step up is to print in sections, sew all along on tapes and case in. That would look like most thesis bindings, but open much better and last much longer. To be fair, in my research for this video, I did find a few binderies that would print or at least bind a thesis in sections. I think this is a relatively modern innovation due to digital printing, especially on A3 paper. Comparing my thesis to my wife's, it's interesting that mine has some nice features which have helped it survive rather well. The library corners are unbumped where Helen's are all bent in. The head and tail of the spine covering is in good shape thanks to the piece of cord inserted under the turn-ins to form a head cap, and the text is solid in the case thanks to reinforced end papers. Even though it's definitely cased, it reminds me a lot of a 19th century library binding in full buckram, with the split board attachment. It even has a French groove. It is unusual for a commercially bound thesis to have these features. I don't remember why it's the case. I doubt if I paid extra for an upgrade. Maybe I got lucky and got the bookbinder that did quality work. It's these nice features that have worked so well that have informed my design choices for this project. And it was the French groove that inspired me to not case, but to do split board attachment. This is a significant upgrade for a modern thesis binding, and it will result in a book that will survive decades of regular use. But it is very close to the library binding I've already done. To add more new methods to this video, I decided to use the supported French groove, also known as the semi-French groove or Harrison joint. I'll talk more about the history of this technique in the next video and have some diagrams to make it clearer exactly what this feature is. Next week I'll round and back the book, attach a hollow, make the split board inserts and attach the boards. In the final video I'll prepare the book for covering and cover it. As always, I really appreciate you hitting the like button. If you're able and want to, you can support the making of more videos like this through Patreon or with a one-off contribution, and the details are in the description below. To find videos I've made on specific topics or other projects, the best place to go is the Daz Bookbinding Video Guide. It's the index to the channel. If you want to be notified of my future videos, please hit the subscribe button and select the notification bell. Until next time, cheerio!